Welcome to Facts Radio, your journey through history begins here. In this episode, we explore the fall of the Roman Empire, power, corruption, and the legacy that shaped Europe. It's a story of grandeur and decay, of emperors and soldiers, of ambition turned to ashes. From the marble halls of Rome to the distant windswept frontiers of Britain and Gaul, we'll trace the empire's slow, tragic descent, then ending so vast and complex it changed the very idea of civilization. Chapter 1: The Rise Before the Fall. The story begins not with collapse, but with glory. Picture the empire at its zenith, legions marching beneath crimson banners, aqueducts stretching across valleys, the hum of commerce in markets where all the world's goods could be found. From the deserts of Egypt to the forests of Germania, Rome's reach seemed eternal. Its roads linked continents, its laws bound nations. The Mediterranean was not a sea, it was Mare Nostrum, our sea. But greatness carries its own weight. Even at the height of power, cracks had begun to form. The vast distances that once showcased Rome's dominance also strained its unity. Communication faltered, corruption grew, and the cost of maintaining such magnificence bled the treasury dry. Imagine the Senate in session on a hot summer afternoon, senators arguing over taxes, governors demanding reinforcements, while outside the forum, ordinary Romans queued for grain. Rome's wealth had once come from conquest, but the frontiers could expand no further. Without new lands to seize, the flow of spoils slowed. The empire, built on perpetual motion, was now a giant standing still. The emperors of the 2nd century inherited peace, but not prosperity. To defend so vast a realm required more soldiers, more administrators, more gold than any treasury could bear. And beneath the surface, Rome's moral fiber began to fray. Political office became a path to personal fortune. Bribes, not merit, bought command. The disciplined citizen soldiers of old were now mercenaries fighting for pay rather than patriotism. Imagine the tension, Roman generals bargaining with tribes for troops while boasting of eternal strength. The empire's unity, once forged in shared purpose, was dissolving into a web of self-interest. Yet even as decay set in, the empire dazzled the world. The Colosseum roared with spectacle, the bath steamed with luxury, and poets still sang of the glory of Rome. The contradiction is haunting. At the very moment of its perfection, the empire was already dying inside. Like a star burning at its brightest just before collapse, Rome's brilliance blinded it to the coming darkness. The reign of Marcus Aurelius, philosopher and emperor, marked both a peak and a turning point. His stoic writings pondered virtue and duty, but his life was consumed by endless wars on the frontiers. When he died in 180 AD, the peace he'd fought for perished with him. His son, Commodus, was no philosopher. Arrogant, cruel, and self-indulgent, he cared more for gladiatorial games than governance. Rome, the eternal city, had entered the age of decline. From this moment on, history became a pendulum, swinging between chaos and control, reform and ruin. The foundations had shifted, even if the towers still gleamed. The fall of Rome had begun, not with invasion, but with corruption of the spirit. Chapter 2: The Age of Crisis and Corruption. By the 3rd century, the empire teetered on the brink. Power changed hands with dizzying speed, more than 20 emperors rose and fell in barely 50 years. Most died violently. Some ruled for mere months before assassination or defeat. The empire had become a revolving door of ambition and betrayal. Imagine the uncertainty. A soldier's loyalty no longer lay with Rome, but with whichever general promised better pay. Civil wars erupted across provinces already strained by plague, famine, and economic collapse. The great Roman coin, the denarius, was debased until it was little more than tarnished metal. Inflation soared, trade shrank, trust vanished. In cities that once gleamed with marble, hunger now prowled the alleys. As chaos spread, the empire fractured. Governors declared independence, distant legions crowned their own emperors. The unity that had once defined Rome dissolved into rivalry. And while generals fought one another for the throne, the frontiers were left exposed to the rising power of foreign tribes. The barracks emperors, as historians later called them, ruled by force of arms alone. For a time, strong men like Aurelian and Diocletian managed to restore a semblance of order. But their reforms came at a cost. Taxes grew unbearable. Freedom eroded. Diocletian, in an attempt to save the empire, divided it, creating an eastern and western half. What began as an administrative fix would one day become an unbridgeable divide. Corruption seeped deep into every layer of society. Officials sold justice to the highest bidder. Senators hoarded wealth while peasants starved. Even the army, once the pride of Rome, became a marketplace of loyalty. It's hard to believe that the same empire which once conquered the known world now struggled to feed its own people. Amid this turmoil, something subtle but monumental began to shift: the soul of Rome itself. Christianity, once persecuted, began to spread through every class, every province. When Emperor Constantine eventually embraced it in the early 4th century, the empire found a new moral compass, but also a new source of division. The gods of old fell silent, temples emptied. A civilization built on Jupiter and Mars was learning to kneel before a cross. It's impossible not to feel the weight of irony. While faith offered hope to millions, it also fractured Rome's identity. The empire that had once prided itself on unity of belief now wrestled with theological schisms and imperial decrees. The question of who held true authority, the emperor or God, would echo for centuries. As the century closed, the empire had survived, but it was a survivor in name only. It had lost the vitality that once made it unstoppable. It had become, as one historian later wrote, an empire of shadows, great in memory, hollow in substance. Chapter 3: The Barbarian Storm. The 4th and 5th centuries brought a new kind of threat, one that no reform or decree could contain. Beyond the empire's northern borders, vast migrations were underway. Entire nations were on the move: Goths, Vandals, Franks, Lombards, Huns. Pressed by hunger, climate, and fear of other tribes, they poured toward the empire's rich lands like a human tide. Imagine the tension at the Danube frontier, the mist rising over the river as Roman sentries spot columns of refugees on the far bank. Women, children, wagons. Not an army, but a people. The Romans, weary and uncertain, allowed them to cross, only to mistreat them, starving them until they revolted. That revolt became the spark that led to the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, where Emperor Valens fell and an entire Roman army was wiped out. The shock reverberated through the empire like thunder. Rome had not merely lost a battle, it had lost the illusion of invincibility. From then on, the frontiers were porous. The empire no longer dictated terms, it bargained, bribed, and compromised. Barbarian generals commanded Roman armies. Kings within the empire's borders ruled as allies one year and enemies the next. The line between civilization and wilderness blurred. Meanwhile, the economy faltered. Cities shrank, trade routes decayed, and once bustling ports turned silent. Imagine walking through a Roman town in Gaul or Hispania, weeds growing through cracked pavements, statues defaced, the forum empty except for the echo of wind. The grandeur was gone, replaced by survival. Then came the unimaginable. In 410 AD, Rome itself was sacked by the Visigoths under Alaric. For 800 years, the city had been the heart of an empire, the eternal city. Now it was burning. Imagine the smoke rising above the temples, the cries of its citizens, the silence that followed. The world had witnessed something unthinkable: the conqueror conquered. The shock was immense. Even St. Augustine, writing far away in North Africa, felt compelled to explain how God could allow such a catastrophe. Rome's fall was not merely political, it was spiritual. To many, it felt as if the very order of the world had collapsed. And yet the empire staggered on. Emperors came and went, often ruling only in name, while barbarian generals held the true power. Rome's leaders now negotiated not from strength, but desperation, offering lands to invaders in exchange for peace. But peace never lasted long. The Vandals crossed into North Africa, seizing the grain supply that had fed the empire. The Goths carved kingdoms out of Italy and Gaul. The once mighty empire was being devoured piece by piece. Still, in Constantinople, the Eastern emperors watched with a mixture of pity and relief. The East, richer and better defended, survived. But the West, Rome's birthplace, was crumbling beyond repair. The stage was set for the final act. Chapter 4: The Fall and the Legacy. The 5th century dawned like a long twilight. The Western Empire was now little more than a memory stitched together by habit. The treasury was empty, the legions underpaid, the Senate irrelevant. Emperors were crowned and deposed by barbarian generals at will. Power had become a shadow play, performed for tradition's sake. In 455 AD, the Vandals struck again, sailing up the Tiber, plundering Rome for 2 relentless weeks. Temples stripped, palaces emptied, citizens enslaved. The word vandalism would forever carry their name. The city that had once ruled the world now lay humiliated, hollow, and broken. 2 decades later, in 476 AD, the end came quietly. A young emperor, Romulus Augustulus, barely a teenager, sat upon a throne no one respected. His father, a general named Orestes, had seized power but could not pay his barbarian troops. They turned on him, and their leader, Odoacer, marched on Ravenna, the empire's last capital. Romulus was forced to abdicate. Odoacer spared his life, sending him into exile with a pension. And just like that, the Western Roman Empire was no more. No dramatic battle, no final stand. Just exhaustion. It's hard to believe that an empire that once spanned continents ended with a surrender and silence. Yet history often closes not with an explosion, but with a sigh. The Senate sent the imperial insignia east to Constantinople, acknowledging that only one emperor remained. The West had fallen, the East would live on as Byzantium for another 1,000 years. But Rome's spirit did not die. Its laws, language, and architecture became the bones of Europe's future. Latin evolved into the Romance languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. Roman law laid the groundwork for justice across the continent. The Catholic Church, inheriting Rome's administrative genius, became a spiritual empire that ruled minds long after armies vanished. Imagine the paradox: the empire's fall created the Europe we know. From its ruins rose new kingdoms, new faiths, and new ideas. The collapse of order gave birth to innovation. The roads Rome built carried not just soldiers, but pilgrims, traders, and dreamers into the Middle Ages. Even today, we feel Rome's presence, in the architecture of our cities, in our languages, in the ideals of law, citizenship, and empire. The story of its fall is not just a warning of decadence and overreach, it is a reminder that even the greatest powers are mortal, and that out of ruin can come renewal. As the last embers fade and the centuries roll forward, the empire becomes legend. Marble turns to dust, but memory endures. Rome may have fallen, but it never truly vanished. It lives on in every corner of the modern world, a silent architect of our civilization. Imagine standing amid the ruins of the Forum today, the broken columns glowing gold in the evening sun. Listen closely, and you can almost hear it, the echo of marching feet, the murmur of Latin voices, the heartbeat of a world that believed itself eternal. Chapter 5: The Eastern Flame. While the Western Empire fell into ruin, another Rome lived on. Far to the east, on the shimmering shores of the Bosporus, the city of Constantinople stood defiant, a fortress of marble and ambition. Here, the legacy of Caesar endured, reforged in Greek and Christian fire. This was the Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome's mantle and guardian of its flame. Imagine the scene: towering walls glinting in sunlight, domes crowned with crosses, the call of merchants echoing through crowded markets. Constantinople was the bridge between worlds, Europe and Asia, old and new. Its emperors ruled not through conquest, but through endurance. As the West crumbled into the Dark Ages, the East thrived, sustaining Roman law, art, and administration for 1,000 years more. The Byzantines called themselves Romans, not Byzantines. They believed the empire had never truly fallen, only transformed. Their legions still marched under the eagle, their laws traced to Justinian, their faith bound to the church. Yet the memory of the old empire hung over them like a ghost, reminding them of both glory and fragility. In the 6th century, Emperor Justinian dreamed of reconquest. Under his command, generals like Belisarius marched west, reclaiming lost lands, Italy, North Africa, even Rome itself. For a moment, it seemed as though the empire had been reborn. But war is costly, and Justinian's victories came at a terrible price: exhausted treasuries, plague, and rebellion. The empire survived, but never again reached so far. Still, Byzantium's brilliance burned bright. Its mosaics shimmered like captured sunlight. Its scholars preserved ancient wisdom. While Barbarian squabbled in the ruins of the West, the libraries of Constantinople guarded the legacy of Greece and Rome. Imagine the irony: what had been lost in Rome's decline was now protected by those who once called themselves its descendants. But even the strongest walls could not keep the world at bay. New powers were rising: Persians to the east, Avars and Slavs to the north, and soon, a new faith from the deserts of Arabia. The empire endured them all, battered but unbroken. For centuries, Constantinople would stand as the world's last Roman city, a flickering torch against an encroaching darkness. The eastern flame had survived the fall, but it would burn alone. The world around it had changed forever. The old empire's dream of unity was gone, replaced by kingdoms, faiths, and cultures shaped in the crucible of Rome's absence. Chapter 6: The Birth of the Barbarian Kingdoms. As the Western Empire faded, new worlds were taking shape in its shadow. Across the former provinces, barbarian warlords laid down their swords and began to build. The Goths, the Franks, the Vandals, the Lombards, all carved realms from the bones of Rome. Imagine the transformation. Where once stood marble forums and aqueducts, now wooden halls rose over muddy courtyards. Latin gave way to new tongues, Roman law to tribal custom. Yet even as these kingdoms rejected the empire, they could not escape its influence. They adopted its institutions, its religion, even its dream of order. The conquerors had become heirs. The Franks emerged strongest of all. Under King Clovis, they united Gaul and embraced Christianity, linking their rule to divine authority and Rome's forgotten glory. In Italy, the Ostrogoths under Theodoric ruled wisely, preserving Roman administration even as they forged their own identity. For a time, it seemed as if the spirit of Rome lived on, reborn in a dozen forms. But unity was an illusion. Rivalry and ambition soon tore these kingdoms apart. Old loyalties dissolved, new borders shifted like sand. Imagine a continent of ruins and rebirth, a Europe without an empire, but full of possibility. Out of chaos came invention. Roads crumbled, but trade routes found new paths. Literacy declined, yet monasteries preserved the written word. Civilization had not died, it was simply transforming. In these centuries of transition, the Church became Rome's truest heir. From the ruins of empire, bishops and monks built a network that transcended borders. Latin, the language of empire, survived as the language of faith. The Pope, once just one bishop among many, became a moral emperor in an age without crowns. And so, from the ashes of empire, something new began to rise, a Europe that remembered Rome, but no longer needed it. The empire's collapse had scattered seeds that would one day bloom into nations. But for now, the continent was a patchwork quilt of warlords and wanderers, learning once more how to govern themselves. Imagine the silence where legions once marched, the sound of a single church bell echoing across a valley that once trembled beneath imperial might. In that silence, Europe was being reborn. Chapter 7: Faith and the Holy Empire. Out of the uncertainty of the early Middle Ages emerged a vision, a dream of order under God. As Christianity spread, kings and emperors sought not only power, but divine legitimacy. The idea of empire, once political, became spiritual. Rome's fall had left a void, and faith rushed to fill it. In the year 800, on Christmas Day, a new emperor was crowned. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, knelt before Pope Leo III in the great Basilica of St. Peter's. As the crown touched his head, a new Rome was proclaimed, the Holy Roman Empire. It was not a rebirth of the old empire, but an echo, carried by faith rather than legions. Imagine that moment, candles flickering, incense thick in the air, chants rising as Latin words once reserved for Caesars were spoken anew. Europe, long fractured, felt a spark of unity. Charlemagne ruled with iron and intellect, spreading learning, law, and order. His scribes revived classical texts, his builders raised cathedrals that soared like prayers of stone. For a generation, it seemed the Roman spirit had returned, cloaked in Christian robes. But power, once tasted, always corrupts. After Charlemagne's death, his empire fractured, his heirs squabbling over inheritance. The Holy Roman Empire endured in name, but not in unity. The dream of a single Christian empire would haunt Europe for centuries, inspiring both glory and bloodshed. And yet, the legacy of faith endured. Monasteries became beacons of learning. Monks copied ancient manuscripts by candlelight, preserving the wisdom of Plato and Cicero while kings waged war outside their walls. The Church, inheritor of Roman administration, maintained order where kings could not. It crowned emperors, mediated disputes, and shaped the conscience of nations. Imagine the paradox, an empire of the spirit ruling where the sword had failed. Rome's dominion had ended, but its idea of universal order lived on through the Church's reach. Across cathedrals and courts, one phrase echoed still, Roma Aeterna, eternal Rome. By the dawn of the second millennium, Europe had found stability again. The darkness was lifting. But Rome's ghost remained, its legacy both blessing and burden, a mirror in which every ruler saw both inspiration and warning. Chapter 8, The Crusades and the Return to the East. In the 11th century, the call to arms echoed through Christendom. Pilgrims and knights alike took up the cross, marching eastward toward Jerusalem. It was more than a holy war, it was a reawakening of imperial ambition. The descendants of Rome's conquerors now sought to reclaim the lands once held by the Eastern Empire. Imagine the clang of armor, the shimmer of banners, the promise of redemption and glory. To many, the Crusades were a path to salvation. But beneath the prayers lay politics, old rivalries, new empires, and the unending human hunger for power. For Byzantium, still standing after centuries, the arrival of Western Crusaders was both a blessing and a curse. At first, they came as allies. Later, they came as conquerors. In 1204, the unthinkable happened, Crusaders sacked Constantinople, looting the city that had once been Rome's proudest heir. Statues melted for coin, relics shattered, libraries burned. It was as if the empire had finally been betrayed by its own reflection. The Fourth Crusade shattered the last illusion of unity between East and West. Christianity itself split deeper, the Orthodox and the Catholic, the Greek and the Latin. The empire survived, but only as a shadow of its former self. The torch that had burned since Caesar's time flickered low. And yet, through tragedy, knowledge flowed. The Crusaders carried back to Europe the science, philosophy, and mathematics preserved in the East. Old Roman texts returned to Western hands, igniting a spark that would later grow into the Renaissance. Even destruction can sow creation, even plunder can spread enlightenment. Imagine those scholars, centuries later, poring over rediscovered scrolls, hearing once more the voices of Cicero, Virgil, and Aristotle. The empire had died, but its wisdom refused to vanish. The Crusades, born in blood, had unknowingly bridged worlds once more, west to east, faith to reason, darkness to light. Chapter 9, The Fall of Constantinople. By the 15th century, the empire that had begun with Augustus had shrunk to a single city. Constantinople, once New Rome, stood alone, its walls towering over the Bosporus like a final defiance of time. But beyond those walls, a new power was rising, the Ottoman Turks. Imagine the tension of those final days, cannons thundering against walls that had stood for 1,000 years, the smell of gunpowder mingling with incense, priests and soldiers side by side in prayer. Emperor Constantine XI, last of the Roman emperors, rode through the city streets, blessing his people, knowing the end was near. On May 29, 1453, the walls finally fell. The city was overrun, the cross was replaced by the crescent. The last emperor died sword in hand, vanishing into legend. And with him ended the empire that had begun more than 15 centuries earlier. It's hard to believe, 1,500 years of history, countless emperors, battles, triumphs, and tragedies, ended in a single day. The fall of Constantinople marked the true end of the Roman world. Yet even as its domes burned, its legacy found new life. Greek scholars fled west, carrying manuscripts and knowledge that would ignite the Renaissance. Rome had fallen twice now, once in the west, once in the east. But each fall gave birth to rebirth. The Ottoman conquest transformed the city into Istanbul, crossroads of continents and cultures. The idea of empire itself, Roman at its root, would live on in every kingdom that aspired to greatness. Imagine standing on those ancient walls today, the skyline of modern Istanbul rising beyond. The ghosts of Rome linger there still, silent witnesses to the end of an age, and the beginning of another. Chapter 10, The Echo Through Time. Centuries passed, but Rome never truly vanished. Its spirit flowed through every kingdom, every republic, every empire that followed. From the crowns of Europe to the columns of Washington, from legal codes to language itself, Rome endures. Imagine a modern city, glass towers rising where once marble stood. Beneath its streets lie the bones of Roman roads, beneath its laws, the logic of Roman minds. The Senate of the United States, the parliaments of Europe, even the words justice and citizen, all bear Rome's mark. The idea of empire, too, has never died. The Holy Roman Empire, the Russian Tsars calling themselves Caesars, the British Empire ruling in the Roman tradition, all sought legitimacy from the same ancient dream, unity through power, order through law, greatness through ambition. Yet each, in its own way, would learn the same lesson, that no empire lasts forever. Rome's fall was not a single moment, but a mirror of humanity itself, our triumphs, our arrogance, our resilience. It reminds us that civilizations are not destroyed by enemies alone, but by the weight of their own excess, the erosion of their values, the corruption of their purpose. And yet, out of every fall, humanity rises again. The knowledge Rome preserved became the foundation of modern science. Its architecture inspired beauty across millennia. Its mistakes warned generations to come. The empire's ashes became soil for new worlds. When we speak of the fall of Rome, we are also speaking of rebirth. Every civilization carries within it both decline and renewal. The true legacy of Rome is not marble or conquest, it is endurance. The ability to build again, to learn, to hope. Closing summary. The story of Rome is the story of us. Ambition, power, brilliance, corruption, collapse, and the eternal will to rise again. From a cluster of huts on the Tiber to an empire that ruled the world, Rome embodied humanity's boundless potential. And in its fall, it revealed our greatest truth, that even the mightiest must someday yield to time. Imagine standing in the ruins of the Forum at dusk. The air is still. The stones beneath your feet once felt the tread of emperors, senators, soldiers, slaves. Every fragment around you, through columns, arches, broken statues, speaks not of loss, but of legacy. Because though the empire fell, its spirit became the scaffolding of civilization. Rome teaches us that greatness demands virtue as much as strength. That corruption, once ignored, can devour empires. That no power, however vast, can outlast the decay of its own ideals. Yet it also teaches us hope, that from decline can come rebirth, from chaos can come order, from ruin can come beauty. As centuries rolled on, humanity built new worlds upon Rome's foundation. We inherited its art, its law, its courage, and its cautionary tale. The empire's fall was not an end, but a turning of the page in the book of human endurance. And so, when we gaze upon the past, we do not mourn Rome, we thank it. For its brilliance and its failures, its glory and its grief, all shape the world we call our own. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you made it this far, you're the reason we can keep going. Please subscribe and help us continue sharing these stories with the world.